Ready?
All right. So we now have Chad Davis, PE and CFM with Wise County.
Like she said, I'm Chad Davis. I'm a Wise County engineer. I've said for a lot of years that engineers should be outlawed from public speaking, but I thought I might share some of this with y'all and hopefully help y'all. The title is I Hate Change, and we'll get into that. How many of y'all have ever heard the phrase, I have a drainage problem? Well, here's a couple of comments that you might remember. They'll probably get you out of that problem. The first one says, no, you don't. You're experiencing gravity. They will probably get mad and not call you back. The second one is IQ and elevation tend to be proportional. That one may get you fired, but you'll still get out of the drainage problem. Whenever we're encouraging, excuse me, thank you. To encourage low impact development techniques and other green infrastructure design consideration, I ran into an issue with this. We kept having problems in our developments, and I got to looking and I thought, whenever I was doing bridge designs and culvert designs earlier on in my career in Wise County, I was using somewhere around 10 inches per hour for rainfall intensity. I got to looking at some of the developments that were getting turned in, and they were getting in 6 to 7 inches per hour. If you look at that real close in that calculation, that's a 53% increase in runoff that we were not accounting for. I'm still having issues with that. Some of the developers, engineers are sending those to me, and I'm having to correct them and say, no, quit looking at a graph or a bar chart and finding out what your runoff is and start doing the calculation so that you're actually accommodating the actual runoff that we're experiencing. I've heard the phrase go green several times today. I would encourage you to go native. We're having problems in the developers that I've talked to when we're doing our thoroughfare plan. They said, we need water, whether it's surface water or groundwater. They said, we need water. And everywhere I go, people are running water out on the ground so their grass will look green. The reason I say that is because whenever you have a place where I'm from where you get 26 to 29 inches of rain per year on average, and then people are bringing in St. Augustine from Houston, you can't sustain it in that environment without running water out on the ground. So I would encourage you to start looking at more go native instead of go green. Valley storage in Wise County. Wise County has all of the rock quarries and the sand mining that's going on to build the Metroplex right now. In this picture, it's hard to see, but there's trucks running out of there. They're hauling sand out constantly. So valley storage in Wise County is not an issue. Protecting against erosive velocities, we put it in our development rules and regulations, and I would encourage you also start having pre-development meetings with some of your engineers and with some of your developers. Also pre-construction conferences. I've had pre-development conferences, had one guy who came in who had already bought the property. I said, you don't have access onto a text dot road. You're in a floodplain. You're in a breach inundation area. You're not building roads that'll meet Wise County specs. Time I got to strike 5, I thought he was going to need professional counseling. But if you can speak to these people before they get into it and buy that property, then you can at least let them know what they're getting into and what they're going to have to do to meet your standards, to meet your criteria. On ours, we've got a maximum 6 feet per second. I've got a lot of sandy country in the west side of Wise County. And we're also saying no more than 5% increase in velocity. Rock filter dams, I don't know how many set of plans I've had that somebody come out there and put them in our ditch, then it's something we've got to maintain. They don't automatically fix the velocity problem. And a lot of these, detention may be required. And whenever I say detention, I don't mean just the 100-year flood. In the last 2 years in our development rules and regulations, we've made this change because there's a lot of flooding that occurs before the 100-year flood. Now then, we're saying put detention up for the 2-year, the 25-year, and the 100-year flood. We've already touched on this a little bit getting into this, but this is where we get into the I hate change part. Remember this phrase. I've tried to tell this to a lot of young engineers and a lot of older engineers that should have known better, but it says the Almighty had a good plan. Try to stick to it. Whenever you think about that, in our development rules, we've made it where there is a zero change at the boundary of the development. And we've had to defend this with FEMA also. We had a 4,400 acre development. We reviewed it, zero impact at the boundaries. They came back and they said, and an EIT sent me an email and said, you're in violation of your own ordinance. And I said, no, we're not. We had a meeting with the developer, his engineer, myself, FEMA, the contractor. I think there was a dozen people in that room. And whenever we met with them, I told the people from FEMA that was on the screen, I said, we reviewed this and said there's a zero change at the boundary. There's no impact to the any of the structures, and there wasn't but about 5 structures on the whole property. And they said, well, this will be the easiest one we've ever reviewed. Notify the impacted properties around you, proceed. That was it. So I would encourage you to do a zero change. I've also heard, well, before I get into that, in our floodplain development, our floodplain development and our flood damage prevention ordinance, we made a 0.0 change in it also. I think I've got that screen on here. This one. If you look down there on that last line that's hidden up there, it's a little number 0.0 and it's in red. In our flood damage prevention ordinance, we put that it's not a zero rise. By making it a zero change, now then we've required them to do a study for the existing conditions because most of Wise County is in a zone A. That means there has not had a detailed study on it. They don't know what the BFE is. So now then they've got to do one for the existing conditions to establish a BFE. And then they've got to say there is a zero change between it and the proposed conditions. We're also in Wise County, we're in a recharge zone for the Trinity Aquifer. About the third of the western half of Wise County is in that recharge zone. We're not trying to promote a zero rise because I can completely pave this whole area and water will not rise. It'll run off faster. But now then you've impacted the people downstream, and now then we no longer have the ability for that aquifer to recharge itself. So remember, there's a zero change, not just a zero rise. Going back to the other stuff we was talking about just a minute ago, what happens whenever you go downhill like this in a set of skis? If you just turned off the edge of one of the blues or the blacks and just pointed straight downhill, what happens? You gain speed real fast. I mean, it's as simple as slope and versus density or distance. Why do you do slalom whenever you're skiing? Slow it down. That's a pretty simple concept, but you can't imagine how many people, engineers that will put a slope on a pipe or run a street and run it straight down from one point to the next. Use some simple engineering basic knowledge and do what you need to make that where it doesn't change that velocity. Like I said, I hate change. And that's the reason I put it as this. Because whenever you're changing things in your developments, now then you're impacting the neighbors. Most of the people that I talk to call me and the neighbors, and I've told in the pre-development and pre-construction conferences, I said, the first thing that happens whenever you start turning dirt, the neighbors call me and say, I don't like what my neighbor's doing. They're going to turn off excess water on me. What can you do to stop it? There's nothing I can do to stop it. They've met all our criteria. They've designed it. And then the next question is, what can I do to sue them? And that's just the general attitude of the way it is. And I can't blame those people because they've done nothing to their property to change it. But now then their property values go up and they're mad because they're going to have to pay higher taxes. I'm not going to get into Jelane's topics too much, but I will encourage you to look at flood control dams. In 2015, the flood that was mentioned, we had two areas, two roads in the county that got washed out. They were both downstream from a where we did not have a flood control dam. Everywhere that we did, we might have had damage, but we didn't have this. This one was one of the places. That hole is about 9.5 foot deep and 45 foot wide. That used to be a road that I was looking at there. It washed out a 48-inch pipe, and we never found the pipe. It is downstream somewhere on somebody's property. So I would really encourage you to look at your flood control dams. And also, along those lines, one of our Wise County title companies, they went back and they refreshed all of their easements, because whenever you have a flood control dam, there's usually an easement, and it may be a blanket easement for that whole property. If you have an easement, you've got some leverage. That title company went back and did that because most of those lakes were built in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. If you go back 50 years, then you quit seeing that come up on the title search. By that title company going back and refreshing those, now then the first thing they pull up on that property is that easement. And it tells that developer and you, don't build here. But you would be amazed how many people think we can build there and we'll have lakefront property. A lot of the things that you're going to have to deal with, and this is in a floodplain. I was threatened to be sued by 2 different loggers over this property this year. They called me and they said, well, you can't say no on that flood damage or on that floodplain permit. Neither one of them have got it to court yet. The word no does work. You have very little leverage in the counties. You have no zoning authority. Going back to your question, counties in Texas do not have zoning authority. I can't go in there and say, you can't build here because of this reason. The only thing I can do is say you can get a floodplain permit, and that is to get permission. This particular house has had a letter of substantial damage done on it since 2015. It's been through 3 people, and it keeps getting transferred on. If it were up to me, I'd put a stick of dynamite in it, and it would no longer be a problem. This is the same house. It looked great a minute ago whenever it looked like you could do some yard work in it. That house stayed 4 foot deep in water for 6 weeks during 2015. But right now, I've got people wanting to build in it. That's the barn right beside it. There are huge impacts to private and public property because I'm taking a picture from the public road. Put this in your development rules and regulations and in your flood ordinance. I would encourage you to look at that 0.0 change, because the people who do this, who have to go back in here and get a floodplain permit, are going to have to get one for the existing conditions. Then they're going to have to come back and say, all right, here's one for the proposed conditions. Now then, to do that on having 0 impact, most of them get ready to sell after they find that out. The person who bought this before the person who owns it right now, they bought it sight unseen. They'd never even seen it there. There's a flood gauge 200 yards up the road from this place. They said, we've never seen that. So they didn't even know. When you're talking about the size and conveyance of streets and storm systems, adequately, safely conveying traffic, the guy who took this picture lived on the side that's shut off. He had no other access out of there. In a platted subdivision, not in the Zone A floodplain. This one is not, but it's also upstream from one of those flood control dams. This road should never have been allowed to be built. We've also made it where you have to have at least 2 points of access on developments of 25 lots or more. Summer before last, I stood in the Wagner Ranch at a gate of theirs and reported a fire. Took them 20 minutes to get there with either a set of bolt cutters or a set of keys to get in there. I watched 100 acres burn in that 20 minutes. The guy who was on the committee with me for the development rules and regulations, he said, we're all 5 of us that were on that committee were also first responders. He said, Chad, you know we can get in there. I said, yeah, we can get in, but can those people get out? They might not have bolt cutters or a key to that gate. So we've made it where they've got to have at least 2 points of access for any lot, anything over 25 lots. Breach zones, breach inundation zones. Like I said, I'm not going to get into the lanes too much, but you need to have this in your development rules and regulations. This property right here, it's hard to see, but you can see the house that's built on the right. And you see the lake a little over there to the left. They are not allowing us access to where we can maintain that dam. I've also had June the 23rd, I was supposed to be in a legal hearing over a lawsuit, and it was over breach inundation zones. And he said, you can't do that to me. That's a takings. As an engineer, I'm required as the first canon in the code of ethics to protect the public safety, health, and welfare. Unfortunately, you got some legislators who would like to strike that out of Chapter 232 of the local government code. I'd encourage you to speak to them, say, leave that alone. We need the ability to protect the public safety, health, and welfare. Jelaine probably knows where this one is. Can you see the dam to the left? Can you see the houses immediately downstream to the right? I actually had a pre-development meeting with somebody who lived in some of those houses. It was all I could do to keep from telling him, you're an idiot. Why would you build immediately downstream from where a place that could breach and take you off of the map? And that sounds funny now, but I want you to think about down there in the hill country. How many people would build back where it just got flooded and washed out? People's memory is short. They had a flood down there in 87. They had another one in 1932. People still want to go back, and developers still want to go back and put houses and people there so that they can make a profit. Like I said, remember this one, the zero change, not zero rise. It puts a bigger burden on the developer and his engineer to keep people out of the floodplain. Breach inundation. That's in our development rules also. We've got it where they've at least got to do a study to see where that breach inundation zone is so that we can keep people out of an unsafe situation. Detention rates, I've mentioned those for 2-year, 25, and 100-year storms. So far, I've only had one of those since we put that in. And, you know, it's not that hard to design, but you'd be amazed how many of them said, well, we've never done that. My response to them is, you're an engineer. Your job is to find solutions, figure it out. How many of y'all remember this last early part of the spring? It's important to keep people out of those areas. That dam washed out. And because of that, anybody downstream of that just lost all of their property if they didn't lose their life. I would encourage you to put that in your development rules and regulations. And once again, have pre-development meetings with those developers and their engineers as much as possible to prevent these problems from happening. It can save them a lot of money as well as you a lot of headache. Here's where you can find the Wise County development rules and regulations. I don't know if you'd want to use them or not. I can help you with anything or the reasoning behind most of those, and most of them is like everybody else. They've got invisible ink out there and said, this rule is because of this developer. On the Wise County Flood Damage Prevention Ordinance, we updated it. It was 0.10 feet change. We changed that to 0.0 because the people at the urban counties, whenever they heard Harris County come back after Hurricane Harvey, they said, all you people upstream of us are flooding us more. 0.1 foot change, you don't know how wide that is. So say it's on Denton Creek and that's a half a mile wide. How much water is 0.1 feet? That's a lot of acre foot of water. Now then, if it accumulates from there down to Houston, you're talking about a lot of water. So that's when we've made it a 0.0 change. That's why I had this presentation to you, because it's affecting off-system and off-system, on-system design for TxDOT. They've encouraged us to try to make this where it's a zero impact to them as well. And with that, is there any questions? Yes.
Yeah, Chad, great presentation. I have a question regarding your slide that you had a few slides back where you talked about the Wise County Soil and Water Conservation District. So they have rules that you placed into your ordinance. Is that what I saw?
We work with them. Fortunately, we've got a guy who is our 911 address coordinator who is also maintaining all of our flood control dams,
Okay,
and he works for the NRCS as well.
okay.
So whenever I would encourage you to get with them. They're a huge resource and they're usually free. And then they can say, some of ours, they've got protected maps because they don't want people to have terroristic activity along any of those flood control dams.
Right.
But you can go in and talk to them. And a lot of times they will give you that information knowing that you're going to keep it safe, but also to let you know if somebody is in those areas that need to be protected. Any others? Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. So our next speaker is Alyssa Shepard, PE CFM. She is with Dallas County. Her presentation is how Dallas County uses higher stormwater and floodplain management standards.
Good afternoon. As Kate said, my name's Alyssa Shepard and I'm with Dallas County. I'm the floodplain manager. And I have Noe Villarreal is also with Dallas County, and he's here with me today as well. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to see some of my county friends here in the audience. We just heard from Chad with Wise County, but I also see some folks from Denton County and Tarrant County, and I've met some people from Hood County. So I'm excited to see you all here today. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at Dallas County. And one of the things, just like other county governments, we have a county judge and then 4 commissioners. One interesting thing that we do at Dallas County is we partner with our 31 cities for transportation projects. And that's really our core competency at Dallas County, but we make big projects happen in that area. So our mission is we want to deliver exceptional services that promote a thriving community. We improve people's lives, and then we have values such as professionalism and customer focus. That's our overall mission at Dallas County, but then also our Public Works Department. If you've ever met our director, Alberta Blair, she likes to talk about how we improve the quality of life through transportation projects and partnering, and that we like to be respected, responsive, and reliable in all of our relationships. So if you know anything about counties in Texas, we have a lot of duties as county governments. And at Dallas County, it seems like it's primarily law enforcement, especially when I watch the news. But also we do maintain roads and bridges in Dallas County as well. And then, like I said earlier, we're governed by the Commissioner's Court. Also in county governments, there's officials like the sheriffs, clerks, tax assessors, And one thing that I thought was interesting is despite our legal focus, counties have no inherent sovereignty. We're just legal extensions of the state. And so we can't really enforce anything unless it's specifically stated in the legislative documents. And so that's been kind of hard for me to learn. I transitioned from working for a municipal government, and then I started working for a county government. And I would frequently hear, where's the authority for us to do that? And I'd have to go and hunt down the authority. So again, we have limited authority. We're controlled by the Texas legislature, and we have regulations versus ordinances. And also, we do have authority over our unincorporated areas and development in those unincorporated areas. And that's through the Texas Water Code, the local government code, and Stephanie did such a great job of summarizing things for us on that handout, and I really can't wait to dig into that a little bit more. So back in 2017, which really seems like a long time ago, I had just started working at Dallas County the year before. And so we met with Edith Marvin, who was Sue's predecessor here at the Council of Governments. And we talked about all the different menu of options. This sheet of paper might look familiar to some of you all with the county governments, but we adopted a few of these throughout our time, and we did it through our court order. And then we also updated our subdivision regulations and then our floodplain management regulations. So we adopted number 4, protecting against and reducing erosive velocities. We matched pre-developed site runoffs, and we added our freeboard. That was probably the biggest thing that we did. Another thing that we did is we defined the written operations and maintenance responsibilities. And we sized the conveyance of street and storm systems adequately to safely convey traffic. And then we created a stream buffer. And we have a great open space program at Dallas County where we have a lot of preserves where we do save that open space. So within our subdivision regulations, we have a section dedicated to stormwater pollution prevention and then drainage standards as well. And one of the things I wanted to highlight is this criteria manual. The ISWIM criteria manual really helped us with a lot of things because it identifies, for example, the detention pond maintenance plan is in there, an example of it. And then the criteria manual really identifies how to lay out a subdivision and how to go about it from a higher standards and drainage stormwater standpoint. And so that was really helpful for us to just adopt that standard, and it's already there, a lot of these items that are important to us. So one thing that's a little bit of a challenge for me when I first started working at Dallas County, I understood that we were a member of the CDC and the Trinity Common Vision program that Sue referenced earlier in the presentation. And that's for cities and counties adjacent to the Trinity River corridor to adopt higher standards. And so I had heard about this and understood that we were members. And so I had to go digging through court orders to actually find it there because it wasn't identified in our floodplain management regulations. So in 2019, when we updated our floodplain management regulations, we actually codified that into the regulations stating that we're members because we had done that previously through court orders. And then also in 2019, we defined stop work orders and enforcement for floodplain violations. So I want to switch gears and tell you a little bit about how we do our permitting at Dallas County. One of the things that we use is this portal. It's called My Government Online. And our permitting is funneled through a different department that's really dedicated to permitting, and they're known as the Unincorporated Area Services Group. And so we work with them. The permits are received from the applicant. And if you look at this portal on the left, it says customer, and then below it, it says jurisdiction. And so the applicant can enter that portal and place all their permit application as well as all their documents there. And then we get it and we review it. So it goes through all these different departments, and some of those include the fire marshal, road and bridge, health and human services, and then us that are in public works. So this is the flow chart showing how it works. But basically, the application and the supporting documents come to us. We review them. We put our comments in, and then the applicant gets them. And we kind of go back and forth a few times, but eventually, usually we will, they've addressed our comments with the permit process. So this is what it looks like on our end. If it's yellow, that means we've got to address something. And we usually meet on Mondays at 3 o'clock in Public Works, and we go over permit applications. One thing that we also do too is we have a checklist, and a lot of this information is incorporated into the MGO software, and so it makes it real easy to just go through the checklist in the middle of the meeting and look at the plans and see if the applicant has met these requirements. And then this is the detention pond maintenance plan. This is straight from the ISWIM manual, but it talks about how to address maintenance at a detention pond, and it's just been a real handy tool for us. So I wanted to also share with you about how our Public Works Department is now accredited by the American Public Works Association. So Dallas County is the very first county in this whole state of Texas to have received accreditation from the APWA, and it's something that we're really proud of. So it's provided us with a central location for all of our documentation and our standard operating procedures. It's increased efficiencies and reduced wasted resources. And then it also provides a great justification for budget requests. So in order for us to get this accreditation, we had to document our practices in 40 key areas using this Public Works Management Practices Manual. And these 40 key areas were everything from program management to beach management. But one thing that we found is that since we're a county government, a lot of these things really didn't apply to us because, like, for example, we don't operate a water treatment plant. And that's something pretty key to Public Works typically. So we acquired our accreditation officially back in October of 2022, and it was a multi-year process. In fact, it was something that was attempted early on, and when I started at Dallas County, I found these old files in my office that were the attempts previously in the previous decade to obtain this accreditation. So it's a great tool for us, though, because it helps us, like I said, justify items that we want to obtain and the budget requests and that sort of thing. And one thing that's kind of neat is that APWA found that we had some model practices They liked our 5-phase delivery system. And then they also liked the way that we talked about how often we do bridge inspections and the frequency. And so that's something that we're very proud of. And like anything at Dallas County, you'll see we went before the Commissioner's Court to receive recognition, and the whole department just about is shown in this picture. So another thing that we've done, and Stephanie alluded to this in her presentation, but she talked about a master drainage plan that counties can do. And that's one thing that we did. And one thing that's kind of neat about the state flood planning process is that the Category 1 projects really gave the opportunity for county governments to take the lead with these drainage plans, master drainage studies. And so in Dallas County, we did that. And the reason that I say that the Texas Water Development Board kind of gave the lead to counties is because if you see on our map, this area is identified as a HUC 10 area, and you had to do a study that was at least the size of a HUC 10 area. And so one of the things that was happening at Dallas County at the time was that our inland port was growing and growing. And so we wanted to have a study of that area. And so we included that in the call for projects, I guess, back in maybe 2019, 2020, somewhere in that time frame. But we were able to do a H&H study of the overall HUC 10 area, which included 10 Mile Creek. And 10 Mile Creek hadn't been studied since like 1978. And so it was great to be able to do that. That's a major creek in southern Dallas County that runs all the way through Cedar Hill and Duncanville down to Ferris, and then eventually into the Trinity River. And then also we studied Cottonwood Creek, Rollins Creek, and then some of the tasks included floodplain mapping and review of design criteria. But one of the things that the study really did was identify potential projects that could be included in the 2028 Texas State Flood Plan. And so right now we have submitted our final study to the Texas Water Development Board for their review, and they're reviewing it now. They have a few more days to give us comments. And then we're looking forward to having those projects added, and then also the study available to developers and cities and whomever. So it will be a part of the public domain. Another thing I want to touch on, this is kind of an interesting project that I'm working on, but we were contacted a few months ago by the USGS, and they partner with communities all over the country on installing stream flow gauges. And they had some extra equipment available, and we're able to get these installed free of charge. And so I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but at the next Commissioner's Court agenda, which is on August 5th, I'm hoping that our commissioners authorize us to obtain these, and they'll be installed shortly thereafter in August. And it was kind of a scramble to get this done because we had to do it by this fiscal year in order for them to install them free. But we do have to pay for the ongoing maintenance of them in future years. So they're going to be located at 2 places in southern Dallas County. One is going to be at Beltline at Cottonwood Creek, and then the other is at Parkinson Road at 10 Mile Creek. So we're excited about that. And then I know we're talking a little bit about small watershed dams, and Jelaine is going to talk about that in more detail later, and Chad talked about it earlier. But we do have 3 small watershed dams that we maintain in the Rowlett Creek watershed. And these dam locations are in cities. And so one of the things that we wrote into our MCIP agreement with these 3 different cities, one is in Rowlett, one is in Saxe, and then one is in all 3 cities. You can see that one in the center. But we said, hey, we're not going to give you funding for these roads unless you come up with a plan for how you're going to maintain these dams. And so we're working with the NRCS and the Dalworth Soil and Water Conservation Board on incorporating these cities into becoming sponsors. And it looks like we also might get to work with the city of Wiley and Jelaine on that as well. So that's an exciting project that we're working on. I know it seems like this isn't really maybe pertinent to this topic, but I think as far as the county's concerned, I mean, this would bring awareness to these different municipalities because of the breach issues, and they're doing the permitting downstream of these dams. And so that's largely the reason why I want to transfer these dams to where they're being taken care of by the cities instead of by Dallas County. And so our hope is to have that done by the end of fiscal year 2026. That's our goal for that project. And so we're frequently going to the Dalworth board meetings and trying to get them on board with that. And that's something that I am very afraid of with these small watershed dams. I feel like the conservation district boards that are responsible for maintaining them, and sometimes it varies. It can be different in different areas, but for us, Dalworth is kind of dying, and I think some of these other more rural water conservation districts are as well. And so that has me thinking that it's good to transfer them to other agencies that have the resources to maintain them. And so with that, I'll take questions, but that's really all I had. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lissa. So our next speaker is Jelaine L. Carper with the Collin County Soil and Water Conservation District. The title of her presentation is Protecting Sponsors' Land Rights Regarding Floodwater Retarding Structures.
Good afternoon. Again, I am Jelaine Carper. I'm with the Collin County Soil and Water Conservation District. And to give you just a little bit of background about myself, probably the only one that's presenting today that's not an engineer. My degree is actually in agronomy with a specialization in soil science. And I actually worked for USDA Soil Conservation Service for about 9 years. And then I became a stay-in-the-van mom for about 20 and came back about 7 years ago to work for the Soil and Water Conservation District. So had I not had that experience with NRCS, I wouldn't know as much as I do today. I was hired as a half-time staff person and the only one in the office at the time. We do have a couple of other employees now through special grants, but they have specific duties and my job is now full-time. And I spend 85 to 90% of my time working with developers, trying to keep them out of our flood control easements. Aaron kind of reached out to me and asked me to be here today. He had heard me speak at some other gatherings, but they were for other local sponsors. And so then when I read the email feed, I felt like when I did this presentation, maybe I need to start from the beginning a little bit, because it seems like there's a lot of entities and municipalities that know nothing about these structures, have never heard of a soil and water conservation district. And so I'm going to touch on that. I pulled slides from a lot of different presentations I've given, and it's a lot of information. So I'm going to go fast, and I hope it's somewhat coherent. So just a little bit about the history. We hear a lot about the Dust Bowl, but what we don't hear about is before the Dust Bowl and almost immediately after the Dust Bowl, there was a lot of flooding throughout the United States. So Congress passed a Flood Control Act and then several public laws to create a small watershed program throughout the United States. There was a lot of discussion whether or not the idea of the Corps of Engineers type dams, these large dams, were best for flood control. But USDA Soil Conservation Service had been working on this nationwide small watershed dam idea. And that one really, really caught hold. And so they passed several public laws. The first one, Public Law 534, included several trial watersheds, and the Trinity River Basin was one of those. And that is why so many of our dams are some of the oldest in the United States. Many of them were built in the 50s and 60s, a few in the 70s, and then in the 80s, even nationwide, it really started to die off. There are over 2,000 structures in Texas, just under 11,000 in the United States. They are all listed on the National Inventory of Dams by the Corps of Engineers. And in Texas, they are all regulated by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So let's talk just a little bit about the easement and watershed project easements. When the Soil Conservation Service, which became the Natural Resource Conservation Service in the 90s, it's the same agency, went to build these, they had to work with local sponsors. They worked with local governmental entities. Soil and water conservation districts are political subdivisions in the state of Texas. They were created under agricultural law, and we do not have taxing authority or power of eminent domain. So soil and water conservation districts were partnered with other municipalities or agencies that did have taxing authority and powers of eminent domain. So to be a watershed project sponsor, you must be a local government entity. And then the district has the easements, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts holds the easements, and they are responsible for those in perpetuity. Those easements allow for the construction of the dam and the spillways and for permanent water storage in a sediment basin. Now, some of them do not hold permanent water, but most of the ones in this area do. And the thought was that in the 50-year economical return lifespan of the dam, back to the federal government, that those permanent water storage areas would be completely full of sediment. In most cases, that hasn't happened. What we don't know about the small watershed program, and it's not talked about, again, these were all in rural agriculture land. We are actually an agricultural entity. There was also conservation practices that had to be put in place upstream of the dams. 60% of the watershed had to be included in conservation practices, terraces, waterways, converting cropland to pasture land, permanent rangeland, those types of things. We don't hear about that. And that's a huge issue now that we have development in those areas. The easements also give us the permission to store floodwater temporarily. So they're small earthen dams. I'll show you kind of how they work in a minute, but they catch water, hold it for a short amount of time, and then slowly release it downstream. But that short amount of time can be anywhere from 15 to 30 days once all inflow stops. So that flood storage can be continuous or stacked. District representatives have to have access to the dam at all times for operation, maintenance, inspection, and repairs. The easements give a general right of access. And for us in Collin County and most of Texas, these easements were blanket. So they were over the entire parent tract of the landowner that gave the easement. The easements were not purchased, they were donated. And that gave us the right to access across the land. They also knew somewhere in the subwatershed where they wanted to put the dam, but depending on easements, it might have moved slightly upstream or downstream. I think the idea was that once it was built, they would go back and define the easements, but that never happened. Oops. So some common misconceptions. The official name is floodwater retarding structures. We often call them flood control dams. I've heard that today. We can't really control flooding. So we, at least in Collin County, I'm trying to steer away from that term. We say it internally because we know what it means. Flood prevention lakes, we also can't really prevent a flood, but we are trying to retard the floodwater. We always hear them called SCS lakes or ponds. Yes, they were constructed, designed, and engineered by SCS. They are the engineer of record. However, the SCS does not own the structure. They do not own the dam, and they do not hold the easements. They were not built by the Corps of Engineers. They were built in conjunction with Corps Lakes, but they were not built by the Corps of Engineers. These structures were not designed for a 100-year flood in a 24-hour period. And I'm not an engineer. You guys know more what that means even than I do. Again, you can have stacked rainfall events, but FEMA didn't exist till the 70s, and these were built in the 50s and 60s. So FEMA came back and tried to map a 100-year floodplain, but we know that they're not accurate. In Collin County, I've seen at least 2 dams that show no 100-year floodplain around them. I've seen several that we know it's not correct because it shows no water flowing through the auxiliary spillway, or we have some that are, it's one structure, but it's 2 dams with a spillway in the middle, and the floodplain is mapped around part of it, but not around the other part. So we just know that's not accurate. We don't know for sure that they were probably built on a 25-year, 6-hour storm, approximately. And again, that was rural agriculture land upstream without it being developed. We constantly hear from engineers, water will never get that high. It has, it does, and it will again. We hear that they're so old, they no longer provide, well, 50 years was their economic lifespan. They may be silted in, but the flood storage is above the sediment pool. So flood storage, again, is perpetual, which is why the easements are perpetual. And that we constantly get calls that people think since they were built by the federal government that they are public sites and they have access to fish or boat or do whatever. And the majority of them all set on private land. Almost all of them were constructed on private land. We have 2 that I know of in Collin County that now partially sit in city parks. Okay, sorry. It's a little bit of a delay. So I got this recently from the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board. They are the state agency that assists soil and water conservation districts, but we are not under them. So every soil and water conservation district is its own entity. So we all vary just a little bit. The idea from the federal government was locally led conservation. So every soil and water conservation district varies just a little bit. There's 2,038 of these small watershed dams in Texas. And as of recent numbers, 753 are high hazard dams as defined by TCEQ. There are a few that were constructed as high hazard, none in Collin County. I don't know about this COG area for sure, but of the 753 that are high hazard, only 608 still do not meet state criteria for a high hazard dam. So I got the state board to assist me and pull the numbers for COG, and this is what we have. And what we're dealing with in Collin County is we have 99 dams and 60 are high hazard now, and it was 0 when they were constructed. So for this region, there's 658 dams in North Central Texas COG, and 250 of those are now classified as high hazard dams. So this is how they work. You have an earthen dam with a pipe that goes through the middle with an inlet, usually kind of a drop structure. That normal conservation pool level, normal water pool level is your sediment storage. As water rises, it stacks against the dam. And then there is an auxiliary spillway, typically at one end of the dam, for the overflow if it gets higher than that pipe can handle. There is a lower gate valve, but we cannot control the water level. That lower gate valve only drains the structure. So if we open it, well, we can't reach it during a flood event, but if we could, it wouldn't let more water out, and it wouldn't let water out faster. It would just drain the lake beyond the normal conservation pool. So here's an aerial view, kind of the same thing. And I know I'm taking some time, so I'm going to skip through these real quick. This is a conservation pool level. This is not one in Collin County, but I got this from the state board because it's a great visual. This slide is probably actually after the spillway function because you can see that it has eroded out. But this is what the water level looks at normal pool. And this is what it looks like at flood stage. So this structure is functioning exactly as it was designed to do. It looks like there's maybe a foot and a half freeboard on the dam, and the easement or the spillway is flowing with probably 2 to 3 feet of flow. So urban creep obviously is a huge development issue for us and concern into our easements. Again, like has been mentioned, our easements are really, really old. They're not pulling up a lot of times in title searches, and that's become a real problem. We're getting locked out of structures. We can't get access. So there's a lot of issues with this. Here's an example that I got from the state board. I have some from Collin County, but this was a really good one. This is Plum Creek watershed near Austin, I believe on the east side of Austin. It's a little hard to see, and I don't think I have a pointer, but you can see kind of the normal water level there in the center. There's a yellow dot kind of right on the dam. What you can't see is kind of to the north and west is the dam actually extends really far. And you can see all the houses around it. Oh, I just went all the way through my slideshow. Yeah, no, it skipped to the end. Sorry about that. So this is what it looks like at flood stage. This is not as high as the water will get. Kind of at the bottom there of the picture is actually where the auxiliary spillway is, and that auxiliary spillway is not even flowing yet. So water will get higher, and you can see that there are already houses in the water there. So this is directly from TCEQ. This is what causes a hazard classification. It's development behind and downstream of the dam, which in most cases, Soil and Water Conservation District easements do not include that area. So we have no control over that. So we rely on municipalities to help us with those issues. And this is the same dam that I just showed you in the other 2 slides, Plum Creek 6, that showed all the development right behind the dam. That's how close water is to overtopping the dam. And you have all those houses directly downstream. So under an easement granted to a soil and water conservation district by law, a landowner cannot deny the district access to operate, maintain, and inspect a structure. They cannot undertake activities that would impair the purchase of the district structures or activities that would damage the structure or its spillways. That includes pretty much everything. Anything that might change the way that structure functions, building homes, building roads, that's the way the easement was written. And it's perpetual and it goes with the land. So you cannot just do away with it if you sell the property. The Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board, as of this year, has a new interactive online GIS layer that you can access through their website. And it's a neat easement notification area. So at the bottom and this is just a screenshot, but you can put in an address anywhere in the state of Texas. And if it pulls up inside a gray area, you absolutely need to be working with your local soil and water conservation district. That gray area does not define the easement. The easements may be beyond that area because of the blanket nature and the access. But if your address falls within that gray area, you better be contacting your soil and water conservation district. And so then when you click on that gray area, anywhere inside that gray area, it will tell you the county that you're in, the site number, the NID number, the watershed that it's in typically, and who your local soil water conservation district is, and a link to their contact information. So in Collin County in 2022, once COVID hit, we just became overwhelmed really with development and encroachment. And my district board started asking the question whether or not we could charge fees to do some of these reviews, which in the past will be 80 years old next summer. So since these were built, we were told we could not charge any fees. But they found some documentation that said maybe we could. And so we decided to start charging encroachment fees. And I went to the board and said, if we're going to do this, if I'm going to do this, we really need policy and a manual. We always had policy. It was kind of a one-page thing, but we developed a very comprehensive manual for encroachment. And we sent it out to all of our municipalities and the county. Our county is working very well with us, the engineering department, to use this. And it's been very successful. Some of the municipalities are still not quite on board. And so it is a constant challenge for us. We still have a few that are rural and agricultural. So our manual has to cover all of the possible encroachment and concerns such as overgrazing a dam into full-blown development. Some of the biggest things that changed really with this encroachment manual, besides the fees, is now for any dam that has not already been rehabilitated, which is only 8 or 9 in our county, we are going to maintain an easement at least to top a dam plus 3 feet. And that allows for that rehabilitation in the future. We know that it's needed. We know it's coming. And then we have to make sure that we maintain our access areas as well. Besides our policy, though, it's important to know that Texas Administrative Code, there is a whole section for dams and reservoirs. All of these NRCS, SCS constructed dams fall within this, and you may have other private dams in your county that are considered farm ponds that also fall within TCEQ's regulations. So they have certain things such as you cannot dredge within 200 feet of a dam, and that's upstream or downstream. So a trench behind a dam, if it's within 200 feet, is still dredging. Anything that may cause or undermine that dam and cause it to collapse. You cannot instill a utility line pipeline through the dam or the spillway. And any roads constructed should be more than 200 feet away from dams and spillways. For us, blasting and oil or gas wells is not a huge deal, but for some of you it may be. So it's important to know that there is Texas law regarding dams and reservoirs in Texas. So I reached out to Collin County because, as I mentioned, engineering has been working very well with us. And this is a direct quote from one of the county engineers. But basically, they have added that state board GIS layer, I think, to some of their GIS layers that they use. And if anything falls within that gray area or even nearby, they immediately send developers to us. And they will not even review anything at that point until they have gotten approval from our Soil and Water Conservation District Board. And the other thing is they are requiring breach analysis for the breach inundation zones, and they're not allowing permanent homes to be built in that area. So I ran across this quote a while back, and I use it as much as I can. I really don't know Wendell Berry, but it seems like he's kind of a modern day Aldo Leopold. or Hammond Bennett, but I really like this, and I think we're going to be incorporating it into our manual soon. We are looking probably in the next couple of months of making a few changes to that, but so far it's been really helpful and successful. I don't know why it's just my slides that are doing this. So any questions if we have time? I know I'm a little over and it's a lot of information, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Right. Thank you.
All right, so we do have an opportunity for comments. Any other questions? So we'd like to open the floor to folks online and folks in the room.
Kate, there is a question online. I'll read it out. Jelaine, I think this is for you. Are there allowed uses of dam breach inundation zones like county parks?
Yes, I think parks would be, we're really concerned, obviously with people sleeping in their homes at night or permanent dwellings. I believe City of McKinney, they have become a co-sponsor of a few dams in Collin County, and they allow some commercial development in breach limits, but they don't allow permanent homes any longer. But I believe they did in the past.
Okay, any more questions or comments? All right, I'm going to ask folks who are online to please stay on for just a few more minutes. We have a post-workshop survey. It's going to look very familiar. I believe it is worded exactly as the pre-workshop survey, just to see what you gathered from this workshop. All right, I'm seeing folks wrap up the survey. So thank you so much for participating. For those of you who want continuing education credits, we do have 2.6 CFM credits that were approved for this workshop. Those of you online, please place your name and email in the chat and we can email you the certificate and the agenda. For those of you who are in person, we do have the sign-in sheets near the door. There's a column there where you can indicate that you would like to receive a certificate. Just please make sure to include your email address. And finally, contact information for all of today's speakers. Thanks so much for participating in our workshop. We're grateful for the opportunity for our speakers to disseminate this information. And we are going to continue on with the TSI study. Feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to become more involved. If you are a local government and we have not yet visited your community, we would love to do so. Thank you so much, everyone.